So welcome to Unbroken, the safe place for male survivor podcast. Because every male survivor deserves hope, healing, support, and a BMW. And here's your male survivor, leadership coach, and hypnotherapist, Thomas Edward. All right, guys. Hey, welcome once again. All right, this is Unbroken, and this is, of course, a safe place for male survivors. And this is your male survivor resiliency coach, Thomas Edward, coming to you from Sacramento. All right, so we're experiencing just a little bit of a cool spell here, but that's okay. You know, that's good. Take it while you can get it, because when the heat is here, the heat is on. I think that was an old Glenn Fry song. But yeah, so we'll take it. We'll enjoy it. I try to never, if we get rain, which is not that often, even if it comes down in buckets for like 2 days straight, and then you're like, ugh, I never try to complain, because I know in the summertime, it's like, I don't want to have water rations. So that's really important to me. Right. Shout out to my people in the UK out there, and thanks to my people in Dublin, Ireland, out there. I'm really excited when I get to see, I don't know, for some reason, I always have I've been doing this more than 25 years, and I always have I'm going to say a substantial international reach for some reason. Even the guys and things that come from the workshops, they're flying over from, New Zealand, Australia, British. And so I'm just always amazed of the people. And then I applaud those people, like they're willing to do that in order to find the freedom that they are looking for. And that's why I'm here, to help you to reach those pieces of it, portions of it. Oftentimes I'll get guys and they're like, man, Coach T, I think I might be, too old for some healing, some freedom. I'm like, you're never, ever. I'm like, even if we can let's just say, work and heal one area of the many, then I feel that we've accomplished something great. And oftentimes that's what happens, but things start cascading. And so, we'll start going through the program, and then we do the workshops, and then we do the hypnotherapy, and something, bam, it just clicks for the person. And it's like their whole world just starts opening up, because they're not in survival mode anymore. And they start to see all these possibilities, like, oh, I could have did this, I can do this, and I can do that. And it's just so exciting to see individuals when they are in that mode and they're not in survival mode anymore. So I am more than happy to be able to do that. And then here's the other thing. I had like one survivor, and all he did was he just stepped out. He's like, you know what? I'm just going to sign up for one coaching session. And he signed up for one coaching session. And when we had that coaching session, it probably lasted 90 minutes, maybe more. But, as we were working through the stuff, and then he realizes, like, wow, I really need to do this. And he was like, man, but I don't know how I'm going to do this. How am I going to do this financially? And I'm like, this is the time you can do, GoFundMe, reach out to friends, let me know, right? I'll call out because what happens is sometimes some of the survivors that come through the program, they're like, hey, we get it. And so maybe they'll offer like a partial financial scholarship or something like that to do some coaching sessions. But the thing is, they want to know, because they've gone through the program, are you for real? I mean, do you really want to do this? Because if they're like, we're going to invest. If we're going to invest in you, we want to make sure that you're going to follow through, that you're going to do it. We don't want someone who's going to just drop out of the program, right? Because they understand the investment that they had to put in. So they want to make sure that, yeah, we want to help that person, but we don't make sure it's right for them. So that's the thing, you just never know. It's like you have to take that step. And when you see something that you think is impossible, you still have to continue to push through it. And I think that's really challenging for us oftentimes because our nervous system, we're going to say, has been conditioned in such a way where, okay, we maybe try it and then we give up if it doesn't work out exactly the first time, instead of like, look, you know what? I'm going to like, okay, can we do it this way? Or can we do it that way? Or, to get creative, and we possibly can. But the thing is, you got to ask, right? And so that's where we're at. All right. So we're still working on our series, and this is for those partners, spouses, loved ones, family, friends, whatever, of male survivors. And you're just trying to figure out kind of what's going on inside of our head and what's going on with us, because it's affecting everything and we don't know what to do. So today is kind of, this is one that comes up so often, but it's one I'm going to say that partners and spouses, loved ones don't like to talk about. And they're afraid, I guess we could say, well, I'm afraid that the male survivor, that he might be acting out. And I just don't know how to address or how to handle that. So let's talk about, I'm going to say something that sits just under the surface for a lot of partners and spouses and family members, but it doesn't always get spoken to directly. And so the fear that something just isn't right. So not necessarily obvious, and it's not always, confirmed, but I'm going to say it's kind of felt, just that feeling. And maybe you're noticing, maybe it's just a shift in the behavior, or there just seems to be a change in the energy of the individual. Something just doesn't quite add up. And so maybe as the partner, spouse, loved one, you're just noticing, well, is this increased distance? Is that what's going on? Or maybe there just seems to be a little bit more secrecy, or there's been changes actually in sexual behavior. Or I just noticed that they're spending, more time on the phone, computer, laptop, whatever. And late nights just, they just don't fully make sense. And you're like, well, what's going on? And so you start thinking to yourself, it's like, okay, am I overthinking this, or is there something actually going on? And here's where it gets, I'm going to say, even more complicated, because if he has a history of sexual trauma, or we have a history of sexual trauma, and you don't know how to interpret what you're seeing, then you're going to be asking, well, is it acting out? Is it avoidance? Is it they're just trying to cope with the issues, or is it disconnection? And you don't know, how do you bring this up? I mean, you can listen to the last one, we talked about walking on eggshells. And I was like, well, how do I bring this up without, seeming like I'm accusing, or, I want to make sure that I don't push him away any further, or I don't want to trigger something deeper, abandon, rejection, those different type of things. So you're sitting there and you're just kind of sitting with it. But then the longer that you sit with it, you'll start to notice the heavier that it actually gets.
I don't have proof. That's what makes this so hard. If I had something clear, I think I know what to do. But it's not clear. It's just different. He's been more distant lately. Not completely gone, but not fully here either. And there are these little things. He's on his phone more. Turns it away sometimes when I walk by. He stays up later. Says he's just unwinding. And maybe that's true. But something in me feels off. And I hate that feeling. Because I don't want to be that person. The one who's suspicious. The one who's questioning everything. But at the same time, I can't ignore it.
And then my mind starts going, Is he watching something? Is he talking to someone? Is he disconnecting from me? And then I hit the wall. Because I don't know how to bring it up. If I say something, I'm afraid he'll shut down, or get defensive, or just deny it. And if I don't say anything, I feel like I'm sitting with something that's growing. And there's another layer to it. I know what he's been through. And part of me wonders, is this connected to that? And if it is, I don't want to come at him the wrong way. But I also don't want to ignore something that might be real. So we just sit there, in between, not knowing if I should trust my instincts or talk myself out of them. And that's exhausting. Because now I'm not just dealing with what might be happening, I'm dealing with not knowing how to deal with it.
All right. And so those are the voices of the spouses, the partners, the loved ones, family, and they're just trying to figure out what's going on. All right. So let's just run through our normal, our usual, right? So the CSA root. So what's underneath this? Now, here's the thing. This is where things really get layered. I'm going to say layered and complicated. And probably because what might look like what we might call acting out, it often has deeper roots. So let's just talk about, some of these things that might be underneath that when we talk about the CSA root. All right. That's a lot. Okay. So the first thing we need to realize is that sexual behavior actually can become a coping strategy. And so you're like, oh man, okay, it's the person acting out and you're thinking, well, okay, is it that I'm not satisfying them, or, they don't love me anymore. And the reality is when we're trying to get underneath this, like we said, it's layered. It can actually be that the sexual behavior has actually become a coping strategy. So when sexual experiences, were introduced, whatever, for this person, this individual, especially in childhood, through trauma, then what happens is that the body can learn to actually use the sexual stimulation as a distraction, as a regulation, or as an escape. There's other, but I'm going to say those are the three main things. And so for the person, the sexual behavior is not about connection. It's not like they're connecting with the other person, but it's often about regulation. Okay, so that's the one we're talking about. How layered is this? That's one of the first things to think about. So the other thing is that we have to remember that the arousal pathways were shaped early. And this is often what is challenging for people. And this is why people I think this is one of the reasons when you go to, psychologists and in the mental health world, and they say that sexual abuse is one of the worst types of abuse to take place, right? Because it has all these different complexities to them. It's firing, especially for kids, it's firing, pieces in the brain or areas in the brain that shouldn't even be firing at this point. And now it has no words to explain what's going on. It has feelings. And so all these things are just kind of just jumbled in there. And so arousal pathways, when they're shaped early like that, the brain wires, we're going to say, patterns around stimulation, around secrecy, and also around intensity. Now, often, and this can be a hard one, especially for guys, and because they're like, but wait a minute, what do you mean arousal? Well, okay. We often think that, you've got to be in the mood, whatever, in order for there to be arousal. But no, stimulation, just physical stimulation actually can cause arousal. And so now we have this arousal pattern that's shaped early in our childhood. And if we don't have the opportunity to start working on it when we become adults, it's still there, right? So then later in life, those certain behaviors can feel familiar. They might even feel comfortable, even if they're not healthy. Okay. And so, as the partner, the spouse, you're like, okay, what's going on? Well, that's how the brain is wired, these patterns around these different areas. Now, here's the other thing for us to think about. You could call this number 3 if you wanted to. I'm in my mind here. Control actually replaces vulnerability. So in trauma, so when you're abused, right, there is no control. The other person is controlling you, controlling your body, these things that are going on. And so in adulthood, controlled even sexual behavior, so things like porn, fantasy, secretive patterns, they actually can feel safer than real emotional intimacy. Why? Because it's the control, right? It's hard to control like other people. And so it's easier if I go into the porn world, the fantasy world, because when it comes to control, I can kind of control those situations. And so I don't have to worry about the real emotional intimacy that I want to take place. I can dream it up, feel it, whatever. Okay. Now, remember we talked a little bit about secrecy. And what happens is when we're talking about these complex pieces in there, shame is also driving the secrecy. And so if there is confusion or shame, especially around sexuality, it often doesn't get shared. So I want you to think about this. So from the perspective of, so the sexual abuse happens to the person that you love as a child. The brain's trying to figure out all these different things. It's already being introduced when we talk about, sexuality, and it doesn't even have any idea what this is. So now you get older, you start going through puberty or different. And so now you've got this confusion, there's shame because society says, well, this shouldn't happen, but it did happen. And now you're trying to figure, did I let it happen? Did I cause it to happen? And well, who are you going to share that with? Who are you going to talk to about that, especially in our society, right? Oh, because we have a big hang up when it comes to sexuality. And so what happens is it gets hidden. And so when it gets hidden, then the shame, of course, just drives the secrecy. So it increases the isolation. It increases the disconnection. It increases these internal conflicts and struggles that the male survivor is having. All right. Now, that's just a few. I think that was around 4 that I named there when we're talking about. But can you see how, when we talk about how layered this is, how complicated it can be? And so this happens to someone as a child. And now, especially if they don't get any help or any support, so now they're growing up in all these things. Even the way that they see the world, of course, is through this view. So when we think about what are some of the reinforcing factors, why does this stay hidden? Well, this is often why maybe you as a partner, you feel it, but you can't always confirm it. Okay. So that's because you've got these behaviors and they're just subtle. Okay. So the behavior is subtle. It's not always obvious, but it just creates some type of uncertainty that seems to be there. Or maybe what happens is when you say something, there's what we call denial or minimization. So we confront it directly, or you confront it directly. And so maybe he might deflect, he might, downplay. Oh no, that was just a, Victoria's Secret ad that came across on my whatever. Okay. Or they might even just shut down. And so when they do, it's not necessarily, they're not trying to actually deceive you, but they are trying to avoid the shame, right? Shame is very, very deep. And it's one of the pinnacle issues that we have to work with for male survivors. So then partners, well, they're going to hesitate to bring it up. Why? Because they don't want to accuse, they don't want to be wrong, and they don't want to cause damage, right? And so then the topic just stays unspoken. But the problem is because of that, for the partner now, the spouse, this silence is increasing suspicion. So if there isn't any clarity, without the clarity, guess what? Your mind starts filling in the gaps. Okay. And so it starts creating, we're going to say, some of the narratives to the story, which now is going to create more internal stress. All right. So as an adult, what's the adult impact? Right. So what is this creating? So over time, when we have this dynamic, it's going to create, I'm going to say, a specific emotional experience. So one's going to be internal anxiety. So now you're constantly wondering, okay, what's actually going on, right? And maybe now you're going through the person's stuff, whatever. Maybe you're looking through their journals, trying to get some more information. Or now you're the one who has a loss of trust. And it's not just in the individual, but maybe you're losing trust in your own instincts. And so you're like, man, am I overacting? And so you even start questioning, yourself as the loved one, or emotional distance, right? Because something just feels unresolved. And so we can't really have that closeness that we want to have because you're still trying to figure things out. And then when we think about this impact, well, then we've got tension. And I'm going to say tension without conversation because often nothing is said, but we can feel it, right? You can feel the vibe and you know that something is there. But then here's one that maybe as the partner, as the spouse, the family member you're running into, there's a fear there. And there's a fear of what you might find, right? And that's the part that oftentimes we don't talk about, we don't say. In other words, what if I'm right? What if he actually is acting out? All right. So you guys know me. We're going to geek it out a little bit here on the neuroscience. So our neuroscience insight. So why is this behavior? What's going on, right? So this isn't just about choice. It's about conditioning. It's about being in survival mode. So number one, I'm going to say we have what's going on, at least from a neuroscience perspective. We've got what I call the dopamine plus escape patterns. Okay. And so what this means is it means that the sexual stimulation actually releases dopamine. This is why I say this is so messed up, because sexual stimulation, sex is one of the most powerful, and I do mean one of the most powerful dopamines out there. So imagine a child being exposed to that, the dopamine going off into the brain. And now the brain, just like any other drug, is always trying to figure out how can I get that same dopamine high feeling. And so the whole life now is chasing that. And the thing is, it can never go back to that moment, even though you're trying to do it in your adult life, right? All right. So when we talk about this dopamine and escape patterns, then what happens is the reason we're doing it because it reduces stress for us, right? You heard about being pent up and stuff. And so it reduces stress because there's the dopamine, right? Feels great. Or it's a distraction, we're going to say, from emotional comfort. So then what does the brain learn? It learns that, hey, you know what? This helps me feel better. Now, this is one thing people have to understand. I run into this all the time, especially when I have survivors or clients who come in who have like very strong, whatever religious, whatever fundamental, let's say, beliefs. And I'll say to them, like, well, this person, they're just morally whatever. And I said, you need to realize that pain will trump your values. Okay? Pain will trump your values. So from a brain perspective, it's just trying to figure out how can I not be in pain. It's like going into this altered state. Okay. And so the brain is learning, okay, well, this helps me feel better. It's not really thinking about it from a moral perspective or anything. It's like, how do I relieve the pain? Even if it creates problems later. Okay. All right. Neuroscience. What else is going on? Well, we already talked about avoidance of emotional vulnerability. So that's one of the things. So emotional closeness requires, guess what? Exposure, being open. And so when we're in this mode, we're avoiding the emotional vulnerability. Okay. And so we could say even the presence of whatever being in the relationship, that's because it feels unsafe. And so since it feels unsafe, then the brain is looking for alternatives. Okay. How can I avoid this emotional vulnerability? Okay. Well, I'll go out now. I'll act out, and that will feel safer, or it will give me other alternatives than actually being vulnerable. Then we have, I'm going to say from a neuroscience perspective, compartmentalization. And so the brain separates the relationship from the behavior, right? So remember, it's just trying to figure out, I can keep saying it, pain will trump your values, right? And so the behavior, it's not thinking about the relationship, it separates those. And so, but it's the behavior that actually is bringing the relief. And so it's compartmentalizing there. And so he may not connect the impact fully of what he's actually doing. Okay. So just realize and understand that. And then once again, shame. You're going to keep hearing shame, because it's a very, very, very powerful source, but shame shuts down honesty. So when shame is activated, the system, of course, avoids disclosure, right? And we've talked about the shame, cycle before. Things being triggered is just like the addiction, cycle. Oh, I'm never going to do that. You do it. And then you're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And then you go into the shame cycle. And then how do you relieve the shame? Oh, you go back and you do something that makes you feel good. Okay. So that whole cycle. And so when we think about this, because disclosure is actually a risk. If I disclose, there's a possible risk of rejection. Okay. Once again, do I want that pain? No, because pain trumps my values. All right. So when we talk about strategy, what might actually help? And so I'm going to say this is where the loved one, the partner, the spouse, that we need clarity and grounding. And I'm going to say the first thing is trust the signal, not the story. So your body is picking up on something, like we said before, like, well, is this true? Is this not? I got this strange feeling. Okay, your body is picking up on something, and that really matters. But instead of jumping to conclusions, it's going to be important for you, I'm going to say, to stay in curiosity. I wonder where's that coming from? Maybe you're looking at things and like, there seems to be a lot of, stress that's going on. Maybe at work, there are things that are piling on the person. And so it's triggering them. And so now they're trying to find ways to actually cope with that. So you gotta stay curious about this. I'm going to say that the next thing is you do have to bring it up, though. And I'm like, you're probably like, ooh, yes, you do. Right. And you have to bring it up, but you have to bring it up without accusation. Right. And so the key, so maybe instead of saying, hey, what are you doing? Or, are you hiding something? Okay. Now already know that once we use those terms, they're seen as accusatory terms. And then what happens, the brain automatically goes into fight mode. Okay. So we want to be careful. So maybe we should try, let's just say, well, you know what? I've been feeling a little bit of a shift, and, I just want to understand, what's going on. Oh, maybe you don't seem as happy as you used to. And I'm just feeling like there's a shift that's going on there. Okay, so that's what we're doing. So we're trying to make sure that we're bringing it up, but we're not using what we call accusatory language, because then this is going to actually lower the defensiveness. Then we have to focus on the impact first, not the behavior first, but the impact first. You know what? And so maybe it is, you start, and I always tell people start with the I phrases first. You know what? I've been really feeling more disconnected lately. Okay. So notice what I did. So I started off with myself because that's the reality of what's going on. No matter what the other person is doing, it's like, I've been really feeling more disconnected lately or from you lately. Right. And then you can go into it and I just feel like, man, there's a type of shift that's going on. And I just want to understand, are you noticing anything? Right. And so give them the opportunity to do that. Right. You don't want to start with like, well, you've been doing this, then you're naming whatever the thing is, right? Focus on what's the impact, right? The impact is whatever this is, it's causing me to feel a little bit more disconnected from you. And then whatever the answer is for you as the spouse, the partner, the loved one, you've got to stay grounded if he reacts. Okay. So if he does get defensive, if he does shut down, you want to make sure that you aren't escalating. Okay. Did I say that? Escalating. So you want to make sure you aren't escalating. So you want to stay, we're going to say steady. And then remember, I always tell you guys this when you're dealing with male survivors, right? Set boundaries if needed, right? There is no reason, even though we're dealing with all this stuff as male survivors, it's not a reason for us to hurt or abuse other people. All right. I just truly believe that, because then what we're doing is, and we do, I'm just going to say we do, sometimes we do, whether we realize it or not, but it's never right, because then now we're entering that whole, if we want to say, abuse cycle. And so understanding trauma doesn't mean that you ignore its impact, right? And so maybe you can just, you can say, what, I want honesty in our relationship. So this isn't about punishment. This is just about clarity. And so you're letting the person know, hey, I know you're dealing with whatever, blah, 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 right? But so I don't feel disconnected. I just need honesty in this relationship. And sometimes you have to assure the person, not rejecting you, not leaving, but I really need to know so I can support or help you, right? So setting those boundaries, whatever they are, if needed. All right. So then what would be, I call it the reality reframe, or coaching reality frame. And so, so I've had, partners say, well, I feel like I'm waiting for something to surface. And that's one of the hardest places, I'm going to say, to live, because there's no certainty that's there. And so what it does, it's creating tension without resolution. Okay. But the truth is, if you ignore it, it doesn't make it go away. But then if you confront it aggressively, right, then you can even cause more damage, or you can shut everything down. And so it's like you're trying to think, okay, so what is the middle ground? Well, so the middle ground, we're going to say, is being grounded and having that honest curiosity. So not silence and not accusation, right? But we're trying to move towards clarity. All right. You know what? I want to give you something to think about, kind of as I'm going to say maybe a closing reflection here. You know what? Feel free. This is deep. Let's just put it that way. Like I said, it's complicated. And if you've got more questions, feel free to go up to the website, bettermalesurvivors.com, or what was the other one that we got? Oh, it was Carry Less and Live Free. I think that one is .com, whatever. I was playing with some stuff. But anyway, bettermalesurvivors.com, and just, send me a question. Right? If you're like, oh, Coach T, I kind of didn't, understand whatever point, whatever on the podcast. Could you just give me a little bit more? I have people who do that, and I'll try to help you the best that I can. But if you're feeling this, just realize that you're not imagining this, right? So there's something there. And so you're not wrong for wanting to understand what's happening. Like I said, I applaud you for even listening to this, because you're trying to figure out, and it shows that you're trying to figure out how to support this loved one, this partner, this spouse, best you can. But it's like, yeah, you've got to get some information also, because relationships need trust. They need openness. They need, I'm going to call it the shared reality. And when something feels hidden, right, then connection starts to break down. And so our goal is, we're not trying to control. You're not trying to control what he's doing, but it is to bring, we're going to say, what's in the dark, right, what's in secrecy, into the open. And so in a way that's going to create awareness, not shame, honesty, and not shut down, right? Because that's, we're going to say, that's where the real repair starts to begin. And so remember, we got to have that safety. If my nervous system does not feel it is safe, it is not going to open up. It is not going to be vulnerable, right? So you might have to listen to this podcast several times, which is fine, just to get a better understanding of it. And boy, I have many more, but we'll see. This is, I think, the third one we've done. So we might I've got some more questions people are asking, so we might take a little bit break, answer some of those questions, and then actually come back to this one. But once again, you guys, thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for being here in this place. You know, like I said, I really enjoy and love what I do. And if there was one prayer I was like, man, I would just be so full that I just had a waiting list. But I'm going to tell you, this is not easy work to do. And practically every client that comes through here, this coaching program, the one thing I hear from them, they're like, wow, there is nothing out there like this. And I love hearing that, right? Because then I understand the things that we're developing and working on are so unique, and that they are making an impact on the people that are actually coming through. All right, guys, until our next podcast session, make sure that you are safe.